Hi, this is Yvette Seeger. We're just getting our last minute technology setup going on here, so we will start the webinar in a couple of minutes. All right, thank you for your patience. We just wanted to make sure that we had all of our technology set up and ready to go for you today. Thank you so much for joining today's FASEB webinar, Introduction to Science Policy Fellowships. My name is Yvette Seeger, and I'm the Director of Science Policy here at FASEB, and hopefully we will have an engaging dialogue either throughout or at the end of today's webinar. So the agenda for today's webinar, I plan to cover a wide swath of topics related to science policy, but I know many of you are joining specifically because you want to hear about science policy fellowships, but I wanted to build to that. First, I'll give you a little bit of background on career pathways, talk a little bit about what is science policy. That's a common question that I get as I talk about what I do here at FASEB. Pursuing a career in science policy, what does it entail? What does our lifestyle look like? And then we'll talk about policy fellowships, specifically FASEB Society fellowships, some tips for preparing your applications, and address any questions that you might have as a result of what the information I present today. So I will go ahead and get started, but before I do that, I just wanted to give you the screenshot of how you can ask a question. You can ask a question throughout. As you can see, there is a box to the right where you can type a question and it will be sent here. And I have great assistants here who will help process all of your questions, so I can try to address them real time, or some of them might get put in the queue and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. But please do not hesitate to submit your comments using the question box. All right, so I'll go ahead and get started with today's material, Introduction to Science Policy Fellowships. So just to start off, those of you who aren't familiar with FASEB, we are 30 professional societies with over 130,000 individual scientists, and you can see the wide variety of scientific societies that we represent below by their logos. And our mission is to advance health and well-being by promoting research and education in biological and biomedical sciences through collaborative advocacy and service to our societies and their members. The reason why societies join FASEB is that they understand and appreciate the power of numbers for communicating a similar message. So as promised, I wanted to give a little background on career pathways. So many of you might be familiar with this illustration. It came from the 2012 report of the Biomedical Workforce Working Group of the Advisory Committee to the Director of NIH, in which they looked at those individuals who pursued PhD training in the biological and biomedical sciences and looked at where they ended up in terms of their career. And what I've highlighted over here on the left is science-related non-research careers. In the middle, you can see that the traditional career that a lot of people are prepared for through their graduate training and their postdoctoral training is academic research or training. But it was quite striking to see the findings of this report that about 20% go into science-related non-research careers. And there's a link when the slides are uploaded to our website. You're able to access this full report if you've never read it. So thinking about what are science-related non-research careers? Well, these are careers in which you apply your scientific training toward the advancement of science, but without pipetting. I always have to add that disclaimer. So you're still a scientist, but you're not necessarily at the bench. And some examples include science communication, science outreach, and the fabled science policy, which you're here to learn about today, which includes policy analysis and science advocacy. Many times I get asked the question, what is science policy? It is a phrase that's used, it's kind of a bucket term. We like to break it down into two categories, science for policy and policy for science. Science for policy is the application of science to develop and drive policy decisions. So using scientific findings, using that data and information to go forward and make policy decisions. Policy for science is something with which many scientists are probably very familiar in terms of, they probably think of them in terms of the rules and regulations that that guide their science. So, all of the paperwork that you have to fill out with regards to your grants, all of the progress reporting that you need to do. But this is, so policy for science looks more at the government laws and regulations and policies that affect scientists and the research and development enterprise as a whole. Who are the drivers of policy development? And this is just to give you an idea of, people think of science policy, and I think a lot of times they either picture the U.S. Capitol or they picture their favorite federal agency, frequently building one at NIH. But science policy is happening all throughout the research enterprise. In the government, it happens at the executive branch. It can be driven by the president and through his or her Office of Science and Technology Policy. It can happen through the legislative branch, which would be Congress. The judicial branch, which would be the Supreme Court and lower courts, also get involved in determining science policy-related decisions. Closer to home would be some of the federal agencies. Mainly your interactions would be policy decisions that affect funding. So this would be the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Food and Drug Administration, etc. And then we start getting a little bit deeper, and this is, these are your federal advisory committees. And these include the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I'm sure you've probably heard reference, even on general news, reference to a National Academies report. Also, advisory committees to federal agencies. This includes at the National Institutes of Health, the advisory committee to the director, which authored the report that I referenced earlier. And then other specialty groups, such as the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Human Research Protections, or SACHARP. These are all advisory bodies that tap into scientific talent to help them make sure that they can develop policies that are most relevant to the scientific community and the current science. State governments also get involved with developing science policy, depending on how much research and development is being done within a particular state. Policy also happens at individual universities, accrediting and licensing organizations, professional organizations such as FASEB, industry, think tanks, and disease and patient advocacy organizations. So the point is that science policy can happen in a whole bunch of different venues, and everybody has a slightly different angle. So when you ask somebody who's a science policy specialist, what do you do? If you ask 12 people in those roles, likely you'll get 12 different angles as to the type of work they do, their work environment. So You probably joined this webinar because you're interested in learning a little bit more about how you or colleague could possibly pursue a career in science. So I like to start this question, and I frequently speak to graduate students and postdocs who are curious about careers in science policy, and I ask you to consider these 7 questions, and I call it, is science policy for you? So do you enjoy learning a little bit about a lot of issues instead of doing a deep dive into one topic? Do you like to keep up with current events and issues in science? Do you like to interact with people and resolve disagreements? Okay, so the second part is a little challenging, but if you like to interact with people and you like a healthy debate, that's what that point is getting at. Do you like to teach scientific concepts to non-scientists? Do you enjoy a fast-paced working environment? Do you like to write, and do you like to write specifically for non-scientific audiences? And are you comfortable working under the pressure of tight deadlines? If you answered yes to, I would say, 5 or 6 of those, you are probably A-okay to think about a career in science policy. I think these 7 bullets really sum up what we deal with on a daily basis and our work environment. But you might be thinking, I've been working at the bench, for 3-5 years. I don't know anything about policy. I just think it sounds interesting. Well, I would like to reassure you that you already have several skills that transfer to policy. So your understanding of the scientific process is key. You are able to take complex issues and break them down. You have subject matter expertise. You have analytical and critical thinking skills. You're able to interpret and synthesize data. You're already able to frame and communicate results. I mean, that's the whole development of a scientific talk or a research paper. And believe it or not, you have project management and collaboration skills. Chances are you're not doing your science in a vacuum. So you are figuring out what you would like to get out of your research project, what reagents you might need, and in addition to reagents, are there key players that you need to interact with? These are all the same things that we do in science policy, except we aren't doing it in a wet lab. We are doing it in terms of looking at different research papers. We're making connections with different groups. It's very similar to science. It just doesn't necessarily involve being in a lab. That said, you have a lot of great attributes being a scientist, but there are a few skills that you might need to sharpen up before you pursue a career in science policy or even start to apply for science policy fellowships. One of the biggest gaps or challenges that you might face lie in communication. So one of the challenges that I've seen is the ability of taking your communication skills and communicating in an active voice. It's a little more challenging to convey scientific information, and it's important to non-scientists. Think about if you had to explain your research without the luxury of all your acronyms and scientific jargon. It becomes a little more challenging, and you have to think about it a little bit more. And just in terms of not only speaking about your research, but communicating in non-technical terms in both your writing and speaking. And also getting comfortable with public speaking to a variety of different audiences. People won't necessarily know about the gene that you're talking about, and you really have to step back and think about all the background information that you have to provide. So, you may have to do some work with some of your communication skills. Another area that you might need to develop a little bit more is your ability to build consensus amongst a group. A lot of times in scientific research, you're interacting with a group that's working in a similar area. You may have differences in how you might approach things. It's the same idea. You're trying to resolve these issues, but the problems may be a little more driven by passion. You have a lot more views going into the development of policy statements than you might have in a specific scientific project. You think about the number of authors on the typical paper, usually ranging from 5 to 7. Thinking about what we do here at FASEB, we have to make sure our policy statements effectively represent the perspectives of our 30 member societies and their 130,000 member scientists. And the last skill that you might need to work on, and I think this is true in almost any field, is networking. And when I give a similar presentation in person, I always ask you, think about how much fun you have in networking. Who has fun networking? It's a challenge, and particularly if it's not your strong suit, putting yourself out there, introducing yourself to people that you may not necessarily know isn't always the most comfortable thing, but it is very important to be well connected to foster your professional relationships. So these are the top 3 that I would say, and thinking even about my own transition from a research career to science policy, these are the 3 that definitely come to mind that are different than what you might do or what you might consider your top 3 in a scientific or laboratory environment. So you've got an idea of what the work environment looks like, some of the skills you might have to develop. How do you get started thinking about a career in science policy? And I like to split this into 2 different strategies. You might just be interested in learning a bit more, so I call this dipping a toe into science policy. You're testing the waters, but you're not quite sure, but you definitely want to learn more. So we have several ways that you can dip your toe into science policy, and they're relatively low lifts, but you could get a good flavor of whether or not science policy is for you. First and foremost, you should join and participate in a scientific society or organization. These organizations are very much entrenched in the policy issues that affect its member scientists, and it's a good way to still talk about your science, but become more aware of the policy aspects that affect your field. Second one is to stay informed on science issues in the news. This is a great way to kind of see how scientific material is being translated into the general press. Possibly it might whet your appetite for other areas of science that, we all are a little guilty of being very focused on our own areas of science. And so the general press is a good way to possibly branch out and learn about different areas of science, because this is what the others in the public are hearing, and so this is their perception of science. You can teach or mentor in your community. There is definitely an appetite for people to, individuals with scientific backgrounds who get excited about science and like to talk about science to non-technical audiences, for them to get involved in the community, be it volunteering for judging a science fair, or teaching a lecture to high school or middle school students, or doing science cafes. Depending on where you are, there are different events, and it can range from nerd night to, I've even given lectures to, I think, first and second graders on science, and just getting people excited about what you do. You can volunteer at a local science museum if you have one near you. Contribute articles or letters to local newspapers and or your institution or society newsletters. They're always looking for content. If you're able to travel to Washington, D.C., you can participate in a Capitol Hill Day or meet with your member of Congress. If you're not able to travel to Capitol Hill Day, you can invite elected officials to your lab. In fact, we'll be producing additional materials about how you can go about doing that, but we strongly recommend that you work with your university. Don't outright just invite them to your lab, but work with your university officials to drum up interest, both in terms of audience and make sure that all the arrangements are set for such a visit. And then, if somebody has a job or is working on something that sounds interesting to you that is beyond your area of research, network with them, make contacts. And most importantly, it's not just having the conversation, but if you really want to keep the dialogue, keep that dialogue going. Do the check-ins. I do this very frequently where people will call me, we'll get the initial conversation going, and then they will follow up and be like, okay, I talked to this person and this person, I looked at this, and this is where I think I'm going. It's very important to kind of figure out your path, just like figuring out which area of science really floats your boat. It's the same thing to figure out where your niche is in science policy. So you've decided that okay, the pool of science policy is not so scary. I might actually want to do this for a career. So if you're thinking about transitioning from your research training to a science policy career, some of the bigger steps that you could take and things that I start to look for when I'm looking at candidates for fellowships or helping individuals think about their transitioning to a science policy is organize a policy discussion group. This is kind of a side lab meeting that you can organize where you just talk about policy issues. So instead of reading research papers and discussing the merits of certain experiments and figures, you would look at, say, a piece of legislation that affects research and talk about your interpretations of what that means for investigators. You can work on a political campaign. Election years are always busy, and campaigns are always looking for volunteers. And that also is a great way to push yourself to talk to people that you don't necessarily know, in terms of phone banking or talking to people at campaign events. A third way that you can think about transitioning to a career in science policy is doing some formal informational interviews with science policy professionals. A lot of people have found me by going through LinkedIn, doing keyword searches. They look at what my position description is, and they say, hey, I kind of want to learn more about that person's background. So, LinkedIn and looking at the speakers at other sessions where they talk about different career paths, don't be bashful. Drop them an email, say that you're interested in learning a little bit more. If you're able to have a face-to-face meeting with them, even better, offer to meet them for coffee or come to their office. Those of us who have been researchers who've transitioned to a non-research career, this is part of our job, and we enjoy talking to people and helping them work through their career aspirations. You can also pursue internships with institutional offices of your government relations, tech transfer, or sponsored research. So larger research institutions usually have one or several of these types of offices where you can get a feel of, what it feels like to work in an office and not necessarily be driven by the timer for incubations, but also learn a little bit. You become a specialist. You're like, oh, I think that's really interesting. I think tech transfer is really interesting. Or, I'm interested more in specific bills that affect what our university is able to do. You can also pursue internships with foundations or advocacy organizations. And then last but not least, the gold standard or the classic standard, although we've had to get more creative as more and more people want to pursue careers in science policy, are established fellowship programs. So policy fellowships. If you're pursuing a fellowship, you're pretty certain that you might want to make this a career or definitely a significant portion of your professional responsibilities. You would pursue a fellowship because it provides you with an opportunity to enrich your scientific training with actual policy experience. You have interest in assisting with the development of policy in a specific area. Another way of framing this is how close do you want to stay to your specific field of science. If you're interested in pursuing a specific field, a specific area of disease research, you can hone in on the policies that affect that specific area. And fellowships are a great opportunity both they're shorter and longer term, to really test drive a career in policy. Is that work environment for you? Are you ready to step out, or, do you want to integrate policy activities in combination with what you're doing at the bench? So the goals of these fellowships are many. First and foremost, they want to increase the awareness of the policy process within the scientific community. It behooves everyone, if the more people who understand the policy process as well as the science, it's better for the science in the long run. In many cases, they have a desire to incorporate subject matter experts, that would be you, into the development of policy. In many cases, the goal is just to engage researchers in advocacy activities, really bring you out of your comfort zone and say, hey, you can do this. It's different from what you do. It's different from pipetting, but you can be an advocate for science. They also want to enhance the communication skills of scientists. And this is to make sure that all of the efforts, those of us who advocate on behalf of increased funding for federal agencies, having researchers who are able to talk to a wide variety of scientists about what their science means for the general public is very, very important. And then going back to, if you think back to that chart that I showed very early in the presentation, expanding the career opportunities that are available for PhD trained scientists. A lot of scientists are not aware of all the different opportunities that are there. If you only know the academic research track, which is very admirable, but you're not quite sure it's for you, sometimes you're not sure where to go. By having the fellowships, you're giving the opportunity for people to really test drive this other opportunity in which they can use their scientific training. So finding a fellowship. There are fellowships are offered by a wide range of groups, professional societies and associations, which I'll talk about some of the FASEB opportunities, FAFSA member society opportunities a little bit later. Private foundations offer fellowships. Government agencies, both state and federal, offer fellowships, or sometimes they're called internships. And you can also, I like to call it, create your or choose your own adventure. Sometimes institutions have administrative postdocs where they're doing a little more policy-oriented work, or even if they don't have a formalized program, they're frequently amenable to having that subject matter expertise and setting up an informal internship. So I encourage you to be creative. I know many times questions I will get, the first question I will get is, I live in New York City. I love New York City. Do I have to move to Washington to pursue a career in science policy? And the answer is, of course, it's a little bit easier to, there's a good science policy community in Washington, but you can get creative and look for opportunities at your institution or with pharma companies. They all need to have an understanding of the policies that drive both funding and oversight of science. And what we have done here at FASEB, and many kudos to my colleagues, Ann Deschamps and Libby Barksdale, for collating a list of fellowships, the link that was on the prior slide. We have a website that is very well curated in terms of fellowship opportunities, and we have them broken down by eligibility. What you will learn as you talk to people about different science policy fellowships is that there are fellowships for which there are certain citizenship restrictions. So I encourage you, when the slide deck is up, or go to our website. We have checked all the links and they are active because there's a wide array of policy fellowships. I think that's another challenge, is finding where the opportunities are. So I'll pause there, make sure there are no questions thus far. All right, so I think that we have a couple questions, but they seem like they'll be better addressed towards the end. So I just wanted to take a pause. We talked about this whole group of fellowships, but now I want to take the opportunity to highlight, and what you can see at the top of the webpage when you go, is highlight some of the fellowships that are offered by FASEB member societies. Are you driving? There we go. All right. So we have dueling mice here at FASEB. So I am so proud of the 5 FASEB member societies that offer formal fellowships, and they are listed here. The American Society of Human Genetics, the American Association of Immunologists, and American Society for Nutrition. I will talk about those 3 specifically today, but I didn't want to overlook the other 2 opportunities that are offered. One is from the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics and the American Physiological Society. These 2 organizations also offer fellowships. ASPET has the Washington Fellows Program, which we have hyperlinked below, and APS has the Early Career Advocacy Fellowship. Part of the reason why I'm not able to speak about them today in great detail is that both of these groups will be at Experimental Biology in San Diego this weekend, and they are actually doing all the preparations to work with their fellows. So I encourage you to check out their programming, where both of these programs are focused on getting early career investigators, either grad students, postdocs, or very early career faculty members, getting them involved in the advocacy process. They convene at Experimental Biology each year, but they do their fellowship at their home institution by engaging in society activities and projects. So I definitely encourage you to check out those 2 opportunities. But the next few slides, I will run through the fellowship opportunities offered by ASHG, AAI, and ASN. And I've ordered them in terms of by how pressing the deadlines are. So I will start with the American Society of Human Genetics. And the American Society of Human Genetics has been working with the National Human Genome Research Institute at the NIH. They've been co-sponsoring the Genetics and Public Policy Fellowship since 2002. And this is a 16-month fellowship designed for genetics professionals early in their career who wish to transition to a policy career, but need to gain experience and training to help them make the transition, make the contacts, build their network. This program is unique because it is based on the participant engaging in 3 different rotations. So the fellow spends time in the policy offices at NHGRI on the NIH campus. Then they also spend time with the policy team at the ASHG offices, and then they spend 9 months in a congressional office. So they really get a pretty intense view of different policy atmosphere. The goal of these rotations is so that you can see the different perspectives and understand the roles of the different stakeholders. They have 1 fellow each year, and I wanted to highlight at the bottom that this program is currently accepting applications, and the deadline is next Friday, April 27th. So if this piques your interest, I would definitely encourage you to take a look at their website, but also be very aware that the deadline is a hard stop on April 27th. The next program is offered by the American Association of Immunologists, and this is their Public Policy Fellows Program, or PPFP. And in this program, AAI welcomes up to 10 postdocs or assistant professors, and they select them to participate in AAI public affairs activities. So they get kind of a boot camp. They learn the role of the President, Congress, and NIH, and these different stakeholders' impact on research and scientist careers. They learn how to best advocate for key policies. And the goal of the program is to develop a cadre of well-informed members who can lead AAI policy efforts in the future, as opposed to some of the programs that bring scientists to Washington, D.C. or the Bethesda, Maryland area. There's no need for AAI public policy fellows to leave their bench for their job. There are only 2 travel experiences during the program, and they do the majority of their work at their home institution. This program is in its 8th year, and it will begin, the current cycle will begin on May 1. And if you're interested in this program, applications for the 2019 through 2020 program will open in December of this year. And on this slide, they provided additional details about some of the activities their fellows participate in. They travel to the AAI annual meeting, and they have specific activities in which they interact with AAI's Committee on Public Affairs, participate in policy sessions, and they have specific program networking opportunities so that they can hear from former fellows and learn more about their colleagues in their current year of the program. They participate in monthly conference calls with the Committee on Public Affairs and AAI staff. They get hands-on training, drafting science sections for Capitol Hill testimony. And really, the benefit to the society is that they provide an important perspective, the perspective of junior investigators, to this testimony. In terms of the traveling, they do participate in AAI's Capitol Hill Day, and the day is actually an extended day because it starts the night before with a dinner where they get their talking points, their marching orders, they can practice their elevator speech, and then they spend a whole day going as groups around Capitol Hill, having meetings with members of the House and Senate, depending on where they live, and depending on how the groups are organized, they may get to visit the delegations of neighboring states. So that's AAI's program. The last one I was going to talk about is the American Society for Nutrition. They have a science policy fellowship. I believe it is 2 to 3 years old at this point. And this is another home institution-based fellowship. This is where you do the work at your home institution, but you're engaged with ASN policy activities for a year. It is open to ASN members, advanced graduate students, early professionals, postdocs, medical interns, residents, or fellows. They offer the fellowship to only 2 fellows each year. And in terms of thinking about your scientific experience, I think this is a nice attribute. Each fellow is paired with an academic and federal agency mentor. So just like you need mentors to help you in your scientific career development or research activities, you have experts who will help you navigate this policy aspect. In addition to the work that you do at your home institution to support ASN policy activities, you participate in targeted programming during ASN's annual meeting. This year it would be Nutrition 18, and participate in the Rally for Medical Research, Hill Day, and other federal agency visits. The call for applications for this program is usually in the fall of each year. So again, look for this opportunity a little bit later in the calendar year. And actually, that's with the exception of ASHG, which their application is closing next Friday. This is a good time to think about science policy fellowships because many of the deadlines occur, or the application cycle opens in the fall, and then the deadlines occur usually in January or February, if not earlier. So those are some of the policy fellowships that are offered by FAFSA member societies. I wanted to close by providing some tips or hints to preparing your application because it is slightly different than perhaps what you would do for applying for a research position. So some tips. Be aware of deadlines. Sometimes the deadlines are extended, but most of these programs have pretty hard and fast deadlines, and that's because they have a pretty extensive review process. So, make sure you're aware of deadlines. Make sure you're eligible for the program before you apply. This will save a lot of last-minute stress, or it will you'll understand, or you'll be able to ensure that your program will make it through the review, or your application will make it through the review process. Provide any references that you may use for the applications with relevant program information and copies of your application materials. This is frequently because most of your references might have more of a research angle, may not be familiar with these science policy programs. So giving them an idea of what the program is asking of you as a scientist, providing scientific expertise, but also so that they can get providing what you submit as part of your application gives them a window in why you're interested in pursuing a science policy fellowship. If you have any questions, be sure to contact the program manager. This is always, if you have questions about specifically your eligibility, pick up the phone or send an email. It's a lot easier to ask the question before you pull together all the materials than waiting till the last minute or finding out after you've submitted that you don't understand the process, or you have questions about eligibility. And the last point is really important, and I strongly recommend it. Speak with former fellows about their experiences in the program. What did they like? What strategies did they use that made their application successful? What are the things about the program that they wish that they had taken more advantage of? Really get their insights, and you'll get, how have they used the fellowship in their current career? So thinking about your specific application, personal statements, some general tips. Avoid the trap of one size fits all. This isn't your college application letter. You should really be tailoring it. It's pretty obvious to reviewers when you have made a canned personal statement. I can't over-accentuate the second point. Review your grammar and spelling. The third point, avoid scientific jargon and acronyms. Have multiple friends, colleagues, scientific and non-scientific, review your statement. Again, going back to some of the attributes of a person who works in science policy, you're looking to have a statement that's written in the active voice. And you might not realize it, but your phrasing of your statement might not make sense to someone who's not familiar with your science. Your statement should express clear areas of policy interest and focus, and be sure to incorporate aspects of the fellowship program to which you are attracted. This shows that you're familiar with the program. If there are specific departments or groups that really pique your interest, now's the time to highlight it. In terms of your CV or resume, most of the programs are not looking for your full academic CV, so you will probably have to take some time to reorganize your CV to emphasize policy-related activities. Again, review for grammar and spelling. Make sure that you've defined acronyms and avoid scientific jargon. Again, talk to your references before you list them. Make sure that they're going to be supportive of your application and your career goals before listing them as someone that the program could potentially speak to about whether or not you're a good fit for this program. And last but not least, and I think this applies to any career path, is beware of the oversell. Also beware of the undersell, but really don't feel the need to overinflate a certain activity. It's very easy for those of us who review CVs to suss that out. So, be straightforward, be factual, But we also are expecting you that you're scientists, you've worked in a lab, and we don't expect you to have a ton of policy experience. Writing samples, preferably not your scientific papers. And so this is something where I talked about earlier, you will probably want to try and seek opportunities to write for a little less technical newsletters or help write press releases. A heads up that many programs ask you to write a 2-page policy brief. If you are submitting works that have multiple authors, be prepared to discuss your specific contributions. For your interview, again, show familiarity with the program, review the key materials from the website, show that you've done your homework. Another way you can demonstrate you've done your homework is develop a list of questions. I always worry when I finish an interview and the candidate doesn't have a question for me. Prepare your personal elevator speech. This is really challenging, I think there are a lot of graduate schools they're having 2 or 3 minute thesis contests, and I think that's great because it helps you for the first question is be like, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us why you're interested in this career of science policy. So you should probably have that very concise statement at the ready. Don't assume that your interviewers are scientists or biologists. You could have a mixed audience, and that might be part of the test. So always think about communicating with a broad audience. Remember that you're not working in the lab, so you should dress for the job you want. In many science policy meetings, most people are business or business casual. And last but not least, it's always good to have copies of your CV, personal statement, reference contact information, and your writing samples on hand. It's always good to say, do you need a refresher? Again, it shows that you've done your homework and that you're taking the interview seriously. So that is what I've prepared for you today. And we still have some time for some Q&A, and it looks like Kimberly is helping me. We've got some questions. And I will scoot over here so I can read them. All right, so the first question, this is very important. Whether or not, the question is, will the presentation be available after the seminar? Will it be available online? Yes. Once this webinar is over, we will upload everything onto the FASEB website where we have our webinars. When you go under, I think it's Science Policy, Communications, and then FASEB Webinar Series, this will all be available online so that you can click through all the great hyperlinks that I included. Great question. What are your thoughts regarding blended careers, such as partial policy, research careers? Is it possible? Are policy fellowships a good way to incorporate policy work into a research career? That's a great question. And I would say quite a few of the fellowships offered by FASEB societies are looking for that blended career. Specifically, I'm thinking AAI and ASN and APS and ASPIT. They're looking to develop within their membership scientists who are really good at their science, but are also engaged in advocacy and policy development. So really look to your professional societies and see if there's a way to engage. As you advance in your career, if you stay in academia, there become positions like, say, Vice President for Research, where the work is actually more policy-oriented than doing bench work. So it is possible, and actually, like I said, many of the programs offered by professional societies are emphasizing, and we want you to stay at the bench, but we also want to give you the avenue to engage because lawmakers love to hear from you guys. All right. Oh, here comes a question that I frequently get. Should one do a postdoc prior to doing a fellowship? Would that make me more competitive? This is a question that I always get, and it varies by program. And what I usually advise people is when you're thinking about, when you're envisioning your career in science policy, how much do you want to identify as a scientist in field X? So for instance, I'm a geneticist by training, but I now say that I'm a science enthusiast. But if you want to be known as a microbiologist or an immunologist and do policies specific to that area of research, I strongly recommend that you pursue a focused postdoc and honing in on perhaps which type of setting, policy development setting that you might want to work in. That helps you determine whether or not you need a postdoc. A lot of the programs are looking for you to some of the broader programs that are set up for you to transition to a policy career. A lot of the applicants now have postdocs because they want to make sure that they are getting candidates who are well known in their field, that they are established scientists, that they understand the science really well, and usually the fact that you've completed a PhD and possibly a postdoc, in some cases a junior faculty position, shows your understanding of the field. There are programs, and I'm an alum of the National Academies program, the Christine Mirzayan Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, that they actually allow you to do the fellowship. It's a 10-week fellowship while you're still a graduate student or shortly after you complete your terminal degrees. So you could be a postdoc. So it depends on the program. Again, this is where talking to prior applicants to the specific program that you're interested in becomes really important, because you get an idea of the type of applicant that will be successful. Do you have to be a current member of specific societies to apply for their fellowships? Great question. That is why I included the links to all the programs. For the most part, if it's a scientific society fellowship, they're usually looking to build up their members. And I think all 5 of them that I referenced today from FASEB member societies require membership in that particular society. Again, that goes back to really looking at the eligibility, and some other fellowships listed on the FASEB website might have membership requirements as well. Great question. You guys are asking terrific questions. Is it more difficult for foreign nationals to receive a science policy fellowship? This is it's a great question, a frequent question, and it's part of the reason why the FASEB fellowship website is split up into different categories. Because I'll admit that a lot of the science policy fellowships are limited to U.S. citizens or individuals authorized to work in the U.S. But there are programs to which foreign nationals can apply. And we haven't even really gotten that deep into other opportunities, say with your embassies, to work in science policies. So, we're continuing to expand that list because that's a common question. There are some programs, so a program that you may have heard a lot about is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. Those are limited to U.S. citizens, and that's because of the agreements with federal agencies. So definitely check out some of the opportunities that we have on the FASEB website. And, if you know of individuals who are not U.S. citizens who have pursued science policy, certainly talk to them about how they got into it, because you can do science policy in the U.S., but other countries also have science policy expertise needs as well. Another great, you guys are asking really awesome questions. I see many of these opportunities require a PhD. What if I have a master's degree? what opportunities are available to me? Great question. Again, this is where you really have to dig into. I mean, I could walk through every policy opportunity we have on the FASEB website, but you know, that would make for a really long webinar. But a lot of them require PhDs, but there are quite a few that they recognize what is expected within the field. So I know that. And I think I know the National Academies Fellowship is open to master's students because of the breadth of science covered there. I believe, and I'm just cross-checking my information because I want to be correct. I believe that so ASN's fellowship, nutrition's fellowship, it looks like, I believe that they can have their professional degree, and I don't want to take the time going through and seeing if that specifically means master's and PhD. I did see MD, but there are some, and again, it varies by field and what's anticipated in your field. So definitely look around, and in terms of the requirements, if a master's is a common terminal degree for your field, there are likely opportunities. Oh, great. So one of my colleagues in another FASEB member society, Genetic Society of America, has another science policy fellowship database that we'd like to direct you to. And what we'll do is we'll add this to the slide deck so that you can have access to it, because, you know, again, and thinking about it's been 14 years since I left the bench, and I know what I had to do to find science policy opportunities. So we will collect these various resources for you and make that link to GSA's searchable database available to you after the webinar. So thank you for sharing that. So are there specific areas within science policy that are in need of advocates, or conversely, areas that have too many advocates? I don't think that, I think any area of science benefits from having people who are excited to talk about their science. So I say, if you're interested in talking about your science to a wide range of audiences, have at it. In terms of whether or not there are areas that have too many, I would love to have that problem. So if you're interested in talking about your science, getting involved in advocacy, you know, do get involved. How competitive is the job market for science policy related positions? Great question, Sophia. Good to see you on the internet. It is, I would say the science policy job market is as competitive as any other job market. You know, there are usually a lot of opportunities to kick off your career, so entry-level positions, and then the same challenges that face many other career paths, that mid-career to senior career, become a little challenging. But this is where being scientists becomes a great attribute, because you get creative and you reinvent yourself and you make your own opportunities, because you just keep expanding your areas of expertise, and then you kind of make that next step for you. But I will say the biggest challenge is getting that first job, and part of that is getting the experience, you know, getting someone to say, okay, you're trained for science, but you want to try something new, and having someone take a chance on you. And I think everyone who works in science policy can point to those few people who took a chance on them very early in their careers. So be tenacious, just as you would be tenacious if you wanted to stay in the academic research lab. if persistence pays. All right. I do want to bring up one thing that my colleague, Andy Shamps, brought through the questions, and I didn't highlight it. But FASEB itself is always amenable to working with interested individuals who want to work on policy at the FASEB level, so the 30 society level, we have memoranda of understanding with several institutions. But if you're interested in talking to Anne about setting up a policy fellowship where you would work on site with me and my team, we would be happy to discuss that with you. We usually do about a 3-month full-time fellowship, but one thing that we cannot offer is that we do not pay our fellows, so we would have to set up a memorandum of understanding to ensure that you continue to receive your stipend if you're a grad student or postdoc. So if you're interested in that, do send me an email and follow up with us, and we can work with you and your institution to set something up if you're located in the Bethesda, Maryland area. I think, Kimberly, that wraps it up. So I thank you all for all your great questions. If you have any other questions, I don't remember if I put my email on the last slide. Probably didn't. You can email me at yseger@faseb.org. A reminder, these slides and a recording of this webinar will be posted on the FASEB website probably by the end of this week, 2 business days. So, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us, but we thank you for your attention and enjoy the rest of your day.